He was standing in an office where dreams quietly went to die, listening to a man with power explain why his future was already over. Too tall, they said. Talentless. Wrong voice, wrong presence, wrong everything. In that moment, it wasn't just a contract being taken away. It was an identity being stripped from him by someone who believed authority could turn opinion into fact. And here's the dangerous part. When rejection comes from the top, it doesn't sound like cruelty. It sounds like truth. You can imagine the weight of the silence after the verdict, the kind that makes you question your own instincts. What if they're right? What if the thing you believe is special about you is actually the reason you'll never belong? That's how careers end before they begin, not with failure, but with borrowed certainty. Someone else decides who you are, and if you accept it, the story stops there. But pause and notice the tension underneath this moment. If he was truly too tall, too quiet, too insignificant, why does this story exist at all? Why do generations still know his name? That question cracks the verdict open and invites you to stay long. Hollywood didn't reject Clint because he lacked effort. It rejected him because he didn't fit a blueprint that executives treated like law. At the time, studios weren't searching for individuality. They were manufacturing certainty. Leading men had to be a specific height, a specific voice, a specific kind of charm that felt safe to market. Anything outside that narrow frame wasn't potential, it was a liability. And when people with authority agree on a rule long enough, it stops sounding like preference and starts sounding like truth. Clint violated those rules simply by existing. He was taller than comfort allowed, quiet in a business that rewarded projection, restrained in an industry addicted to theatrical excess. To executives, height wasn't presence, it was awkwardness. A soft voice wasn't depth, it was weakness. Subtlety wasn't strength, it was absence. These weren't neutral observations. They were judgments shaped by decades of repetition, passed down until no one questioned them anymore. What makes this moment so relatable is that you've probably lived a version of it yourself. You were told you didn't match the standard, didn't communicate the right way, didn't look the part, didn't move fast enough, didn't shine loudly enough. And the hardest part isn't hearing that once, it's hearing it from people who sound confident. When certainty comes wrapped in experience and titles, it pressures you to surrender your own perception. Hollywood's system rewarded sameness because sameness reduced risk. Executives didn't get fired for choosing what looked familiar. They got punished for betting on what felt strange. So when Clint walked into rooms, his differences triggered discomfort, and discomfort was translated into disqualification. It wasn't that he had no value, it was that his value couldn't be measured by their outdated tools. The antagonist's confidence is what makes the rejection sting. There's no hesitation, no curiosity, no space for growth, just conclusions delivered as facts. That kind of certainty can shrink possibility faster than failure ever could, because failure still leaves room for adjustment, but being labeled wrong at the core attacks identity itself. And yet, buried inside this rigid judgment is the quiet irony that fuels everything that comes next. Systems built on narrow rules are terrible at recognizing future greatness. They can only see backward. They reward what already worked and reject what hasn't been proven yet. Clint wasn't rejected because he lacked something. He was rejected because the system lacked imagination. This is where frustration deepens, because standards rarely announce themselves as temporary. They pretend permanence. They imply that if you don't fit now, you never will. That illusion keeps people small, obedient, and quietly resigned. Clint stood at the edge of that illusion, facing a choice most people never realize exists: accept the measurement or trust an unproven inner compass. Hollywood believed it had defined his limits.
In reality, it had only revealed its own, and that blindness would soon become the very reason the industry was forced to reckon with him on a global stage later.
After hearing the words that defined his supposed limits, Clint walked away carrying a weight heavier than any script, heavier than any small paycheck, heavier than the applause he had never received. It wasn't just rejection, it was a verdict on his very being, and the silence that followed pressed down like gravity on his shoulders. In moments like this, the mind begins its quiet, relentless questioning. What if they were right? What if all the time spent dreaming, learning, showing up was a waste? What if the measure of our worth truly belonged to someone else? That is the kind of doubt that can stop even the most stubborn heart, that can convince a capable person to pause, to retreat, to imagine a life where dreams quietly die before they ever have a chance to breathe. He found himself wandering through the routines of daily survival, jobs that felt meaningless yet necessary, and each task became a mirror reflecting the absence of recognition he had hoped to earn. In those hours between work and audition, between effort and opportunity, Clint faced the echo of authority's judgment in every moment of self-doubt. The world had told him he did not belong in it, and for a while the question of belonging consumed him. Can you feel the weight of that? To be capable, to be willing, and yet to be told repeatedly that it is insufficient. That is an experience that lives in the spaces where ambition and reality collide, and it shapes you whether you like it or not. Isolation became a quiet companion, not because he was alone, but because few could understand the internal conversation of someone rejected for qualities they could not change. The voice of doubt is intimate and persistent. It whispers in the dark, asks questions that authority refuses to answer, and paints visions of retreat as practical wisdom. How many of us have lingered in that space, feeling the pull of giving up, imagining a safer path where failure leaves less visible scars? Clint knew that sensation intimately. Yet even as despair pressed against him, there was a subtle tension beneath it, a quiet insistence, almost inaudible, that maybe, just maybe, the verdict was flawed, that possibility still existed where authority saw none. Every day became a negotiation between surrender and resilience. The moments of self-reflection were uncomfortable because he had to confront not only the judgment of others, but also the fear that they might, in some way, be right. What does it take to continue when the world has defined your limits for you? How do you hold your own measure when the loudest voices say it is wrong? That question is universal because all of us have faced moments where external evaluation threatens to override inner certainty. Yet the tension is also transformative. It forces clarity, sharpens focus, and if endured, deepens resolve in ways no immediate triumph can replicate. And so Clint moved through that period quietly, carrying both doubt and a seed of determination. The contrast between external dismissal and internal conviction was subtle but profound, a tension that created space for reflection and recalibration. He considered giving up, imagined retreating into the ordinary, and yet a quiet voice within refused to obey the condemnation imposed by others. The question remained open. Would he accept their verdict, or would he forge his own path regardless? That suspended tension became the invisible force shaping the next chapter of his journey, the silent crucible in which resilience was born, and the space where an underdog begins to measure not against the world's limits, but against the strength of his own conviction.
When you have endured the weight of dismissal, the act of continuing becomes revolutionary, a quiet rebellion against every imposed limitation. Delayed gratification is not merely a strategy, it is a test of character. Clint learned to find satisfaction in the process itself, in the mastery of craft, in the refinement of skill, rather than in immediate recognition. Each minor success was a stepping stone, building not only competence, but self-trust. Can you see how patience, when combined with unwavering commitment, transforms uncertainty into clarity? In those moments, he was no longer defined by external judgment, but by the deliberate, measured choices that charted his own trajectory. By embracing the work itself, he discovered that persistence need not be loud or dramatic to be powerful. Quiet determination builds strength that survives criticism, isolation, and repeated setbacks. It is the rhythm of repeated effort, the accumulation of small victories, that shifts momentum from the unseen to the undeniable. And in choosing this path, he reclaimed agency over his life, refusing to allow others' opinions to dictate his identity or his potential. What starts as a single decision to continue quietly can become the force that shapes destiny, proving that the most transformative choice is often the one made internally, away from the gaze of the world, guided only by belief in oneself. For years, the very traits that Hollywood had condemned became the foundation of Clint's unmistakable presence. The height they called awkward now gave him an imposing authority on screen, a physical language that communicated strength without words. That quiet, raspy voice that had been dismissed as weak became a magnet for attention, each syllable weighted with intensity, each pause deliberate, commanding respect without shouting. How often do we see the world reject the qualities that later define us? The irony is sharp. The same criticisms that were meant to confine him now became the signature that distinguished him from everyone else, transforming what was once a limitation into an advantage that could not be replicated or taught. The people who had judged him so harshly could not anticipate the evolution they had triggered. Authority had pronounced a verdict, yet time reversed the roles. The industry that once set itself as the final arbiter of talent was blindsided by the emergence of a star whose uniqueness could not be measured by old formulas. Can you imagine the sensation of walking into a room where once you were told you had no place, and now your presence bends reality? Every glance that had once dismissed him now acknowledged that he had redefined the standard entirely on his own terms. There is a lesson here for anyone who has felt marginalized or dismissed. What makes you different, what others call awkward, weak, or unconventional, may be the very thing that allows you to shine when the moment is right. The patterns of success often reward conformity, but true distinction is rarely born from the expected path. Clint's journey reminds us that the qualities others underestimate can hold transformative power when nurtured patiently and consistently. How often do we trade the potential of our own uniqueness for the comfort of fitting into someone else's mold? As momentum grew, so did confidence. Every role, every film, every deliberate choice reinforced a new identity, one built on authenticity and self-determined value rather than borrowed validation. The optimism of small victories compounded, creating an energy that was impossible to ignore. Even those who had doubted him could see, whether silently or reluctantly, that the calculations they once trusted were inadequate to the reality before them. That tension between expectation and result magnifies the satisfaction of the journey, the crescendo of proving, not through loud proclamation, but through undeniable presence. Ultimately, what was once deemed a flaw became a brand, a signature of excellence, a lesson in the power of embracing rather than erasing one's differences. It is in the transformation of rejection into distinction that true mastery and confidence emerge. For those of us who have been told we are too much or too little, too loud or too quiet, too unconventional or unworthy, Clint's example serves as a quiet revolution. Your perceived flaws are often the untapped strengths that will set you apart when the moment is right. And it is in the patient, consistent cultivation of those traits that the unexpected triumphs are born, reshaping perception and rewriting the rules for what greatness can look like.
Years of quiet persistence and deliberate effort had transformed Clint from a figure dismissed in hushed studio corridors into a presence that demanded attention without asking for it. Hollywood had once spoken with absolute certainty, labeling him too tall, too quiet, too unremarkable to matter. But now the tables had turned. The very people who had once dictated his limitations were the ones scrambling to align themselves with his vision, to secure his involvement in projects they had no right to assume he would accept. How does it feel, I wonder, to witness those who once reduced you to inadequacy now bending toward the influence you quietly earned? That reversal carries a satisfaction deeper than any applause because it is rooted not in arrogance but in the undeniable truth of demonstrated ability. It is one thing to succeed despite rejection. It is another to be recognized on your own terms, not for compliance, not for conformity, but for the uniqueness that was once dismissed. Hollywood's realization was not a moment of loud celebration or theatrical acknowledgement. It was a subtle but total shift in power. Contracts that would have once been offered reluctantly were now extended eagerly. Offers that had been withheld for years became opportunities presented with urgency. Authority no longer dictated outcomes, it deferred to the presence of someone whose persistence had proven them wrong. Can you sense the potency of quiet vindication, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be felt? That is the satisfaction of creating leverage through unwavering commitment to oneself. The irony is unmistakable. The same traits that had been derided, the towering height, the understated voice, the deliberate restraint, now defined his marketability, his appeal, and his leverage. What once felt like obstacles had become instruments of authority. Executives who had once given him unsolicited advice on how to conform now watched as he navigated negotiations with control, with composure, with the subtle confidence that comes from knowing the long game better than anyone else in the room. How often do we undervalue our own path because it is quiet, slow, or misaligned with expectation, only to find that those same qualities are what others eventually chase? This power shift is not merely transactional, it is emblematic of a deeper psychological truth. True respect and influence are earned through consistency, patience, and authenticity. Clint had built leverage not by rebelling loudly, but by proving the cumulative weight of skill and resolve. The very people who had once dismissed him now deferred, not through fear, but through acknowledgement of competence that could not be ignored. The satisfaction here is profound, vindication without aggression, triumph without pettiness, proof that patience and belief in one's own abilities can rewrite the rules others try to impose. The callback to earlier insults sharpens the resonance of this moment. Words like too tall, wrong voice, and talentless echo quietly against the backdrop of an industry that had misjudged him. Each insult now functions as a marker of transformation, a benchmark for measuring how far persistence, self-trust, and disciplined action can carry someone. It is a reminder that judgments are temporary, but mastery and self-determination are enduring. Hollywood's astonishment was complete, but for Clint, it was never about teaching a lesson. It was about affirming an internal truth that no external authority could ever erase. The very narrative of dismissal had inverted. He was no longer seeking permission or validation. The world was chasing him, and that pursuit underscored the profound shift in status, power, and perception that his journey had meticulously constructed. Clint Eastwood's journey is often remembered for the fame, the money, and the awards, but to reduce it to those measures misses the true lesson. His comeback is not a story of external validation, it is a testament to the power of trusting oneself when the world insists otherwise. What does it mean to hold belief in your own worth, even when authorities, mentors, and peers cast doubt on every step you take? That question is at the heart of Clint's story, because his triumph was never about proving them wrong for their sake, it was about proving himself right on his own terms. In that quiet determination, there is a wisdom we can all draw from, the courage to define your own path, regardless of the metrics others impose. Every choice he made following rejection reflected a commitment to an internal standard rather than an external one.
It's easy to chase the applause, to measure life by others' approval, but Clint's lesson is that true identity is forged through deliberate action aligned with self-trust. Can you imagine what it feels like to operate from that place where persistence is not driven by fear of failure, but by confidence in your own capacity to grow and contribute? That mindset transforms obstacles into guides, criticism into fuel, and rejection into a mirror reflecting the very traits that will one day define your uniqueness. It is not a path of immediacy or spectacle. It is subtle, steady, and unrelenting, yet infinitely more powerful than the validation of others.